When my phone buzzed and Brandon's name appeared on my screen, I should have realized something wasn't right. The single time he ever showed up, we weren't even close to being acquaintances, let alone friends. He told me via text that Sophia's mother had sent me messages, usually in the form of passive-aggressive remarks about our house being too contemporary or how I wasn't respecting family customs. But this message was sent directly to me by Brandon, not Mrs. Caldwell, and it was as chilly as a business email. Hey, we're having a modest family get-together this Sunday at Mom and Dad's place. It's crucial to arrive by 3 p.m. It's a surprise, so don't let Sophia know. You don't have any possibility of making it, do you? A direct demand, as if I were being called before a royal court. My stomach turned instantly. I stared at the message for a while, the words repeating in my mind like an alarm clock. How was I supposed to tell my wife about an unexpected visit to a place where I was never made to feel welcome? It was really strange. My best friend Jordan was drinking a beer at the kitchen counter when I picked up the phone. We had been watching the game, but right now I wasn't feeling it. Brandon texted me. I muttered, sliding my phone across the counter. Jordan picked it up, glanced at the message, and raised an eyebrow, like he had just spotted a trap. He exhaled sharply. Since it's about you, why wouldn't they tell Sophia? Taking another sip, he added, Are you sure you want to walk into whatever this is? The Caldwells had never liked me. They put up with me only because Sophia had dug in her heels and made it clear she had no intention of marrying one of their country club trust fund stockbrokers. I wasn't like them. I didn't grow up going to upscale banquets. I came from a blue-collar family and built my career from the ground up. I met Sophia while networking with CEOs at a charity gala. To them, I was an outsider, but I loved Sophia for who she was, not for her last name. For years, I had tolerated their condescending looks and thinly veiled insults. Even when I was standing right there, they spoke about me in the third person, but something felt off about this invitation, like they weren't just going to reject me this time. Jordan thumped his bottle down, snapping me out of my thoughts. I clenched my jaw. What was this? I typed out a short reply. Sure, see ya. No further inquiries. Just enough to make them think I was walking right into whatever they had planned. Sunday came too quickly. Sophia spent the entire morning curled up on the couch, looking through our wedding photos on her laptop. She always did that when she was feeling down. Leaning against the doorway, I asked gently, You okay? She looked up and I walked over, smiling. Yeah, it's crazy looking through old photos after 5 years of marriage. I gave her a quick kiss, on the top of her head. She had no idea I was going anywhere. I forced a grin, but time was passing and my stomach churned. I wanted to lie to her, but I also didn't want to worry her. At exactly 2:45 p.m., I climbed into my car and drove to the Caldwells' massive 3-story estate in Silverwood Heights, the kind of place that screamed old money, grand iron gates. A driveway lined with imported stone fountains. I parked, took a deep breath, and pressed the doorbell. The enormous wooden doors swung open, not by a butler, but by Mrs. Caldwell herself. She wore a pearl necklace and the expression of a woman heading to a private brunch. Behind her, Brandon stood with his arms crossed, his face impassive. Lena, Sophia's younger sister, lingered in the background, pretending to scroll through her phone. And Mr. Caldwell? Already seated in the lavish living room, a large folder on the coffee table in front of him. My heart raced. Mrs. Caldwell smiled thinly. Come in, dear. The heavy air wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. This was no family gathering. This was an ambush. As soon as the doors closed behind me, I knew I had just stepped into something I wasn't supposed to escape from. Caldwell attempted to grin, using a gentle and cunning tone. Sophia responded, I'm just trying to protect you, sweetie. And her face went blank. Sophia, Mr. Caldwell exhaled through his nose. Like steel. That wasn't my question. Did you carry out this silence behind my back? And that was the only response she needed. Sophia gently nodded before turning to face me. "What did you do?" she whispered. I looked her in the eye. Unfazed, I did something they hadn't expected of me. I went to the packet I had brought and, after opening it, took out a stack of papers, leafing through them until I found the section she requested. Then, I handed them to her. Sophia took them. Her face went pale as she flipped to the first few lines. She turned page after page, slowly glancing up at her father, who stiffened as she said, "You took money from me." "Tell them no," she yelled. "You can't steal from me." I spoke before they could. "Try to change the story, Sophia. They've been using your name to finance their shady business dealings. They've been taking money out of our joint accounts for years, using you as a safety net whenever they needed it." Sophia's hands trembled as she grasped the papers. I pointed to the USB and said, "This can't be right. Check the records. Yourself." All their transactions, dubious wire transfers, and lies were still on the drive, which rested on the coffee table. "Sophia, you must realize that we merely did this to—" Mrs. Caldwell paled. Sophia laughed bitterly. "I love you?" she echoed. "You tried to ruin my marriage, and Brandon, still clinging to power, even told me that you used and stole from me. And you want to call it love?" Mr. Caldwell blinked and chuckled. "Come on, Sophia. Stop being so dramatic." "Excuse me?" Sophia turned to face him, her body displaying unadulterated rage. Brandon paused, but that was enough. She shook her head and stepped away. I couldn't believe it. She turned to me because she felt the need to physically separate herself from her own family. Her voice was softer now. "How long have you known?" I let out a breath. "A few months ago." She looked at me. "As I confessed. You didn't tell me?" "I wanted to. But I needed evidence first." She gulped hard and nodded. I could see the knowledge spinning through her head. Her brother wasn't who she believed him to be. Her parents weren't who she believed them to be. Her whole family had just demonstrated that they saw her as a tool to achieve their goals, rather than as a sister or a daughter, and she returned to the divorce papers. Sophia's mother gasped as she reached for the pen. She signed my documents. And as soon as Sophia did, the Caldwell empire started to collapse. I swear, I heard the Caldwell family's strength crumble beneath them. Mr. Caldwell's face turned completely white, his fingers clutching the table's edge as if he needed something sturdy to grasp. Mrs. Caldwell uttered something, kindly. But Brandon was the first to snap. The gasp was barely more than a whisper. He stepped forward as if he could physically reverse what had just transpired, but he couldn't. Sophia gently turned to face him, her eyes typically warm, now ice cold. "You think I don't recognize my own name on the bank records?" Brandon opened his mouth to say something, but then shut it, realizing there was nothing he could say. Sophia kept shaking her head. "I can't believe you did this. Explain the evidence that's right in front of you." "You all used me." Mrs. Caldwell straightened her back, gathering enough poise to attempt to rewrite the story. "Sophia, we were never exploiting you. We were always looking out for you." Sophia let out a scathing chuckle, devoid of humor. "Looking out for me?" she echoed. Her mother winced. "You deceived me. You stole from me. You tried to end my marriage without telling me." Mr. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He exhaled through his nose so hard that I feared it might break his face, the inaction of a man who made a mistake, but instead of apologizing, was trying to figure out how to win a lost game. "You planned this, didn't you?" he accused. He didn't take responsibility. He never did. The tension in the room thickened. Mr. Caldwell wasn't accustomed to losing. He had been untouchable for years, concealing his financial catastrophes behind his esteemed reputation, maintaining the appearance of control. But as soon as I placed their secrets on the table, that appearance vanished. Sophia broke the silence. She turned to her father, her voice hoarse. "I trusted you. Her father opened his mouth, but she cut him off. You gave me the impression that I could rely on my family to look out for my best interests. Lena had been silent the entire time. You thought I was too blind to notice what you were doing? Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. Lena finally spoke. I didn't. Mrs. Caldwell glanced at her, waiting. Sophia scoffed. You were just a stranger transferring money? Mr. Caldwell clenched. His teeth. It wasn't stealing, Lena snapped. I watched the family unravel, cracks forming in their once impenetrable armor. This is absurd, Brandon yelled, trembling, his eyes locked onto Sophia with utter contempt. You're really going to throw everything away for him? Sophia didn't even hesitate. I'm throwing away nothing. Brandon let out a shaky breath. I'm taking back everything you tried to take from me. The Caldwell family expected their father to step in, but Mr. Caldwell wasn't looking at them. His hands twitched as he stared at the divorce papers, his breathing controlled. But I saw it, the way his fingers curled into his palm, the stiffness in his shoulders. He realized he had lost. For years, he had manipulated Sophia under the guise of family duty. He had influenced all her major life decisions, believing she would always follow orders, but she had already made a decision, and it wasn't his. Dad, Brandon stepped forward. Say something, but Mr. Caldwell didn't respond. I watched him closely. He was trying to find a way back in. I leaned in. You know what's going to happen next, don't you? I said. I motioned to the USB drive. Everything is backed up and copied. Brandon's head snapped toward me. My lawyer had it, and I simply grinned. The silence was thick, strangling, like the final breath of a crumbling kingdom. I let the weight settle over them. Then, I straightened, grabbed the divorce papers, and turned. Thank you, Sophia, I said. We're done here. I slipped them into my folder and started for the door. But Sophia's voice stopped me. Mr. Caldwell, look at me, she murmured. At last he lifted his head. You built your life around control, Sophia said. You thought you would never lose if you controlled everything. She pointed to the empty space between them. But guess what? Mrs. Caldwell was lost. Brandon clenched his jaw so tightly it looked painful. Sophia sighed deeply. I'll let the authorities handle the rest. She turned and walked away, and with that we left the Caldwell dynasty's destruction behind.